Hello and welcome to Stashin with Stephanie. This is my favorite time of the month where we reveal a brand new fat quarter friendly pattern that is part of our Stashin with Stephanie club. So if you are a member of the club, you get this pattern for free, and you can get that over on our website at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. If you're not a member, you can just download this pattern or you can join, and we will send you 12 fat quarters for the price of 10 every month, $29.99 a month. Plus you get exclusive coupons that you can use to get additional fabric to finish the quilt that we have designed, or do whatever you want with it, backing, binding, different project, whatever you choose. You can get more, so you can make a complete quilt out of it. And also you get an exclusive coupon to download it's a physical book to get my new book, Fat Quarter Workshop. And that is available for pre-order right now. It will be out in October or November of 2020. I have my preview copy already. It's so excited, and we'll link a video so you guys can see all the quilts that are in that. They are our most popular patterns from this club, are now available in printed book form, so you can check that out. It is very, very inexpensive. I think it's $14.95, and there's 12 patterns in them, 2 of which are exclusive to the book and have never been released in any other format. So check that out. Make sure you check it out. All right, so today's quilt I'm very excited about because we are going to be doing 4 at a time, no waste flying geese units. Now, if that's scary to you, don't worry. We're going to break it down to make it as easy as possible for you. And I really do think these are very easy. I know one time I was doing them at a quilt retreat, and a bunch of very experienced quilters were around me looking at me like I was nuts, and they couldn't possibly see how this would work out. And then once they saw how it worked, they thought it was super slick, and they really liked how it works. So not only is there no waste with these, which means you use every little bit of fabric that you have, but also I feel like they turn out a lot more uniform in size, because I know sometimes when we're pressing those things open, they can get a little wonky and crazy when we're doing the stitch and flip method. So we've done this a lot before in some of the block of the months that we have done before Stashin with Stephanie sort of took over my life, but we have never done it with a Stashin with Stephanie quilt, and today is the day. So we're going to go through that, teach you a new trick if you didn't know it already. And so let's take a quick peek at this month's fabric, and then we can get sewing. We're going to look at this month's fabric a little differently, and it's actually in the quilt block because I've got them all together except for the one that we're going to make in the video. It is Summer Sampler by Nancy Nicholson for Clothworks, and I thought it'd be really cute to show you in the bundle because in the block because it looks super cute, and 2, so we can talk a little bit about how this works. So each month for Stashin with Stephanie, I take a look at the fabric and I come up with a pattern that works perfectly for that fabric. And in this month's one, there were a lot of these. There were 4 different really light prints, and I couldn't put a print like this or print like this right next to this light print because it would get lost. It would not work. But there also were a decent amount of dark prints and medium prints. So what I did is I designed it so that way your lightest print is in the center of the block, then your medium prints are coming out here and also in the corners, and that's going to make a fun secondary design when we sew that together. And then your darkest prints are out in the sides like this. So that way, if you get a bundle like that, where there just is a lot of light, you can go through it and you can decide, okay, what are my light, what are my medium, and my dark, and you can use all of it and not feel like you have to leave anything out, and it still looks super cute. So the reason for that is a lot of times most fabric is still printed by the rotary screen printing method, and so you end up where you have 2 or 3 colorways, usually at least, of the same fabric. So here, this is the same design but in 2 different colors. Same with this one, it's the same design but in 2 different colors. And the reason is when you are doing rotary screen printing, the most expensive part of that is actually printing the screens, because just like if you're screen printing a t-shirt, that ink rolls through the screen, and it is and you need a different screen for every single color. So a print like this that has a lot of color in it is actually very expensive to make. And so to make it not be so bad, what they do is they print a couple different colorways of it. So here we've got 2 of this one. You can see there's 2 of the bird here, and there's a couple different ones of this little dragonfly here. And this is the same print as this one, and that allows them to still print fabric in a pretty economical economical way and give you typically at least 3 colorways to work with of any one print. Here you can see we've got the blue, the pink, and the orange of that whole one there. And it's cute, it's fun, it's another way to make stuff work. Here we've got 3 of this one, but it keeps things more economical, but again, sometimes it means you get a whole lot of these light prints. So here we have, 3 different light prints, and again, you can't put those together. So my job, whenever I get this, is I have our employee who cuts all the Stashin fabric up, cut me a bundle first, and then I stare at it for a little while and I think, what do you want to be when you grow up, and how can I best use this fabric to show off the line, make the fabric the star of the show, but also really come up with something that's fun and fairly easy to complete, so that way people can do it in a month and not feel like they have too much fabric piling up. And this one just uses 12 prints, and so your bundle gets you everything you need to make it this month's quilt, except you are going to need background, and we do have a bunch of this background print here, and you always get discounts, so that way you can get what you need to finish up the quilt, or you could always make it in a larger size as well. So that is this month's collection. Again, that is Summer Sampler by Nancy Nicholson for Clothworks. It's super cute, and we're going to utilize a lot of that color value where we're working with the light, the mediums, and the darks. So we're just going to get straight into the 4 at a time flying geese. This is also called no waste flying geese. I really like it because I feel like they come out much more accurately than the stitch and flip method, and as the name implies, there's no waste, so you don't have any extra fabric that's left over that you feel bad tossing. So let's get in and show you how this works. Start with 1 large square and 4 small ones, and we're just going to use 2 to start with, so I'll go ahead and move those to the side. But the first thing we want to do is draw a line on the wrong side. I like to use friction gel pens for that. They come in a lot of colors and they do iron off. You can use a pencil as well because we're going to be drawing on the wrong side and no one's going to see it. You just want to use like a regular ink pen because that ink might bleed when you go to wash it for the first time. So what I'm doing is I'm just laying my ruler straight up and down from corner to corner, and then this is really important. A lot of people, when I see people do this for the first time, they have their pen straight up and down. That usually means that you end up with a line just to the side of the center, and then you might end up being just a tad bit off, and it really matters that you are right on for these because you're using every single inch of it when you are putting it together with the math. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lean it in so that the point of my pen is right up against the side of that ruler. And the other thing I'm making sure I'm doing is that I am drawing right into those corners. A lot of times I'll see people draw just a hair off to the corner and they'll think, okay, I'll catch that when I'm sewing. And most people don't, they just follow the line and they don't think about, oh, I need to adjust and get right into that corner. So do pay real close attention when you're doing this to make sure you're going from point to point exactly and that you're leaning that pen in. If you do use a pencil, make sure it has a nice sharp tip so that you have a nice sharp line as well. I'm going to go ahead and do that for the other ones as well. So I typically don't pin at this step, but I'm going to show you how to do it. If it's brand new to you, you might want to give it a try like this for the first couple and then try a few without pins and see how you do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay 2 of these so that way my points are matching at the top and you've got right sides together here. So I've got these corners matching and then I'm going to grab a second one and get these corners matching here. Now when I'm doing this on the sewing machine, what I do is I just have a stack of these and a stack of these and I just, put them in place as I'm feeding it right underneath the sewing machine. But this is a good option, like I said, if you are a beginner. Now I don't want a pin going up and down this way because if I put my pin here, then this corner can shift all over the place, and especially this one down here, and then you no longer have accuracy and things aren't going to turn out the way they should. You always want to pin where you are going to be sewing, which in this case is going to be right up and down this drawn line. So I want to make sure I'm pinning across that line right in the corner. I'm going to do the same thing with the bottom down here. then sometimes when you're working with this, they can get off a little, and you wouldn't want them to be like this far off. You want to try as best you can to have the lines meeting right on top of each other. You can see that the point of this one just extends right into that one there. So when you're getting started, it can be very helpful to just give a little pin, and if you're working on a surface that you can dig your pins into, like this cutting mat, that is ideal. You don't want to do this on like your dining room table because you're going to poke the bejesus out of the top, and that won't be good. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sew down both sides of this drawn line. So typically when we're sewing along the edge, and we either are using a 1/4 inch foot or we are setting our machine up to sew a 1/4 inch stitch setting, and you are going to keep the edge of the fabric even with the edge of your presser foot. When you do any type of triangle that starts off as a square, which is my favorite way to do things, what you're going to do is you're going to pretend like that line is the edge of your fabric. So I'm just going to stitch all the way down this one, then I'm going to flip it over, and we're going to stitch back down this side. And I always sew a scant 1/4 inch seam as well. To do that, I just set my sewing machine up to sew a regular 1/4 inch stitch, and then I move it 1 needle width to the right, and I just get that little bit skinnier seam, which makes it a little easier to have everything turn out the right size. I'd always rather trim off a little bit than not have enough. One other note, I highly recommend that you do not use a foot that has a flank on it. Let me grab mine so you can see it. So some 1/4 inch feet have this little bit on the side. It's a guide, and the idea is that you're not able to push the fabric past that guide. This is challenging whenever you're trying to get really accurate piecing, because this guide is going to hit your pins before you're ready to take them out, which makes it very challenging to get good piecing. It also is challenging when you're doing 4 at a time or any type of piece from this, because this wants to sit on the side of the fabric. It doesn't want to go over the top. So these feet are great for when you're doing things like top stitching on a bag handle. They're not so great for when you're trying to get accurate piecing for your quilting. So I would either do your 1/4 inch stitch setting or get out an actual 1/4 inch foot that doesn't have that guide on it, and you'll have a lot better results. So I usually just leave this top pin in whenever I'm doing things like this, just until I get it underneath the presser foot, because that kind of holds things in place. Now I'm just going to stitch down, again keeping the edge of the presser foot even with that line. And you want to stitch as close as you can to those pins without going over them. I have broken needles sewing over pins. It's not fun. All right, go ahead and pull that out. So what you would do here is you would just keep on chain stitching this down, get all the one sides done. Then you can lift it up, and you are just going to pull a little thread out. You don't even have to clip anything. And I'm just going to sew straight down the other side there. What you want to do, especially when you're doing this for the first time, is give this a little measure. And I'm measuring the distance between the seams, and in this case I'm just a hair under 1/2 inch, which is perfect. You want it to be a 1/2 inch or less. If it is more than a 1/2 inch between these two stitch lines, then you've done something wrong. You're going to need to redo it. So again, if you're trying this for the first time, maybe just do, one of these, see how it goes, and make any adjustments needed before you do all of them. So now that I've got this done, I'm going to go ahead and just cut down on this line. If you're not exactly on the line, not a big deal. It is the accuracy is already there from sewing that scant 1/4 inch seam. However, you don't want to make sure that you have less than 1/8 of an inch seam, because then everything can pop open on the long arm and it can just be too skinny. So same thing too when you're measuring. If you are seeing that you have less than a 1/4 inch in between your two stitches, then that means that that's too skinny and you're not going to have a big enough seam. So you want to make sure that you are somewhere between, I would say, less than a 1/2 inch and 3/8 of an inch is probably like a sweet spot for how big it should be in between those seams. All right, we're going to press this now, and then we will be ready to finish up these. It goes super fast and they're super slick. I think you're really going to like this. So I like to press these open. I just open up that seam and then I just put my iron down. You just want to make sure, especially as you're going over this part, that you get it nice and flat with your fingers, pressing that open before you get to the rest of it. And if you've watched some of our older videos, if you used to do some of the block of the months where we have done these, you'll notice that I'm now pressing it open instead of pressing it over. And the change happened as I did more long arming. You can have a lot more options because you don't have those big humps and bumps from the seams. Everything is super flat, but also these stay much truer to size when you press them open, and you don't have so much weirdness when you're going to trim them down at the end. Now at this point it looks super weird. It looks like we've made a heart and there's no way that this is possibly going to turn into anything, but let me give you a little sneak peek. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put this in and we're going to sew down both sides, and you can see, if I pull that open, that we have one flying geese and two. So it's really cool. It goes super slick. It's really neat. I'm going to go ahead and press my other one and then we're going to finish these up. So if you wanted to, you could pin this as well. I almost never do. I just stack up these and then these separately. And what I do here is you're going to put it, again, right sides together and get your corners matched up, and then your line should be going right into the center of that heart. And one thing to note, if you've done everything correctly, your scant quarter inch seam should be coming out right at the sort of low point of these valleys that's created right there. So you should be stitching right down here and then right back up there. And I'm going to show you how to chain piece these as well, because it goes super fast when you do that. All right, so I'm doing a little stitching. It started off right at that valley, so that's looking good. I'm gonna go ahead and stitch all the way down. I like to hold on to the tip of that, but then when it gets too close where I can't hold on to this anymore, I just shift my finger to the side. That helps me maintain that quarter inch stitch all the way down. I do that whenever I'm doing anything that is on a point like that. Now here is the really cool part. So I can get this next one lined up, and what I do is I've sewn completely off of that first one. I'm just going to lift up my presser foot and slide the next one in, and I give maybe, I don't know, a quarter inch or so in between, and that will allow me to have a nice little break in the thread. Like there'll be a little bit of a chain in the thread, and it'll make it really easy to snip it apart, but then I also won't have all of those wasted thread, and it just is super easy to go through. All right, so if I were doing this for the whole quilt, I would just keep going and going, but we are just doing 2 for the video today, well, a set of 4. And so what I'm doing is flipping that around again. I'm going to stitch down the other side. And then when I get towards the end here, I always slow down to make sure that I'm super accurate all the way to the edge, because otherwise you can get little smiley or frowny faces, which again can mess with the accuracy. And then I get everything lined up and move to the next one. All right, it's time for the magic to happen. Same deal as before. You want to cut straight down the middle, but if you're not perfectly on the line, you're fine as long as you have at least 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now we got those apart, and I've got 1 and 2 flying geese, and it will be 3 and 4 as soon as I cut these apart. Now we're going to press them and trim. So I press these open as well. You just want to make sure when you're going over that you're lifting and pressing so you don't accidentally press any seams going in a direction you don't want. And then I'm going to flip that over and give it a good press from this side as well to get that seam good and flat. And you can see how good this looks here. Occasionally when you do the stitch and flip, these will be drastically different sizes, and you're like, how in the heck does that happen? This one's so much larger. I just don't know. But it's a combination of pressing flat so that we're not taking up some extra space, as when you fold that over, depending on the thickness of your fabric, you can really lose quite a bit. And also just being accurate and taking our time with it. And also when you're stitching, you're always going to be sewing on the bias there, but because it was still attached to the other half of the fabric, it just stays a little bit more stable whenever you sew triangle units from squares first. So this is why it is my preferred method. I'm going to go ahead and press my others. I'm going to show you how to trim this down. All right, so it is very tempting to skip this step, but don't do it because your fabrics are going to sew together so much better and you're going to have such more flatter blocks and accurate piecing if you take the time to get this little bit extra trimmed off. We're going to go through and show you how to do that here. So I'm using my little 6.5 inch square ruler here, and I'm measuring a couple of places. I always like to start with it pointing up. So I'm getting my 4.5, and this one turned out exactly 4.5. So that is great. And it is coming all the way up to the top. I'm just a little shy here, which is okay if you're off just a little bit. It's less than 1/8 of an inch, so that is no big deal. And I'm gonna go ahead and give it a trim. And that gets off those dog ears and a little bit of extra there. Now I'm going to give it a 180-degree flip. And this time I use that 45-degree line on my ruler to make sure that I'm headed straight into that point. So I'm going to get everything lined up. I'm measuring exactly at 4.5 and exactly at 2.5 here. And then I've got that 45-degree line going straight out into the corner so that my points will end up where they're supposed to be. And we really have not trimmed off much at all here, but you can see when I put it next to the other one how much neater and nicer that looks, and it really is going to sew together a lot better as well. We just want to make sure that we've got our points going straight to the corners and that we are doing a good job with that. All right, so that was super simple, super easy, super fast. I hope it takes the fear out of flying geese. I know a lot of times people are like, oh God, flying geese. But when you do it in this method, it feels super fast. You get that instant gratification because you're doing 4 at a time. And then you're able to get really accurate results, which I know is a lot of people don't like about flying geese. Is sometimes it's hard to get accurate results, but I hope with this method you'll be able to do it. Now, if you're still having trouble and you have double check that you're pressing correctly, you're pressing your seams open, you have cut everything correctly to start with, you have sewn your accurate scant 1/4 inch seams when you're doing this, and it still isn't turning out to size, then you got to check where you got your fabric from. I taught a class to this once at my local guild, and you know, there are some people who had quilt shop quality fabric and some people who had bought theirs at a chain, and chain store fabric just does not behave like quilt shop quality fabric. There is a lower thread count and they have different finishing techniques, which makes it stretch out. You would think that when you buy quilting cotton it's all the same no matter where you get it, but it just is not. They go with lower quality so that they can have higher profits, and you get poor results when you're trying to do detail work like this. So you know, if you've never bought fabric from a quilt shop before, just go buy some fat quarters. We have fat quarter bundles available at our shop, shop.quiltaddicts.com. Give it a try with that versus your chain store fabric, and I guarantee you will notice the difference right away just from the way it feels and the way that it holds its shape when you're doing detail work like this. Now you can get as scrappy or as coordinated as you want with this project. What I chose to do to give it like a controlled scrappy look, which is what I like the best, because then you still a lot of fabrics in there, but there is a little bit less chaos in your quilt. And what I like to do is have all my points match. So I did everything in sets of 4 so that I would have the cross be made out of the same 4 fabrics for the points and everything in there. So I have a set of 4 of the flying geese that we just made, and then I have 4 matching rectangles to go with this. And again, all the cutting instructions and you know the different quantities you need of light, medium, and dark fabrics for fat quarters, all of that's available in the pattern. It's called Cross and Dot at shop.quiltaddicts.com. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to sew these guys right sides together. From here on out, I'm doing everything with a 1/4 inch seam. So I only use a scant 1/4 inch seam when I'm sewing any type of triangle unit from a square, again, so I've got a little bit extra wiggle room and I can trim a little extra off the sides rather than have it be too small. I like to sew with my flying geese side up because that way I don't accidentally flip any of those seams going the wrong way when it flips over my sewing machine plate. Sometimes things can get going the wrong direction. So I don't really pin these. Everything should be the same size because we've trimmed all of our flying geese and we cut accurately for the bottom piece. So I just get started, I sew a few in, and then what I do is I just lift up this bottom piece and I will get those corners lined up right on top of each other and go ahead and give that a stitch. And then you can chain piece these as well. I recommend that you do. It will make your life so much easier if you can just whip through all these at once. But again, if you are trying to make them a little bit more controlled with the scrappiness, do make sure you're taking the time to match up the same 4 with the same 4. I'm gonna go ahead and press these open as well. Again, make sure you take time to make sure you're not pressing any of these other bits going the wrong direction. So just do a lift and press as you work your way down. And then I usually get it from the other side as well. All right, so we've got one more type of unit to go in the corners. This is a part that creates a secondary dot design, and it's super simple, super easy. All right, so we're gonna take our little square. You need one big square and one little square. Again, all the measurements are included in the pattern, cross and dot, at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. It looks like I already marked this. You're gonna mark from corner to corner, just like we did before. And again, make sure you're going straight into that corner. And what you're gonna do is you're going to arrange this, match up your corners, everything right sides together. And again, you're making sure that your line is going from the top to the side corner. And then this time we're going to stitch right on that line because we're going to flip this over to create our little corner bit. Sometimes, depending on how I'm feeling the thickness of the fabric, I'll stitch just one needle width to the seam side, so to the right of that line. And then that provides, I feel like, accurate results as well. But you definitely don't want to be on the left side of the line, because if you do that, then your block is going to be too small and it will not fit together right. So either right on the line or one needle width to the right of it if you find that you're having some issues with the thickness of the fabric. All right, so for this, what I like to do is I like to move my needle so it's in the center. I feel like it's easier to sew down the center of a line when the needle is also in the center. You just plays tricks on your eyes if you leave it in the 1/4 inch stitch setting. So I'm just gonna line this up, get my needle in place, and go ahead and stitch down. You could pin this if you wanted to. I've done probably thousands of these, so I'm just gonna go ahead and stitch it. All right, then you can keep going with the others and just chain piece these. Another thing to note here is I can see from the back here is this butterfly is a lot bigger and is cooler. And so that's the side that I want to have flipped up. So I want that to be in my bottom left side when I'm arranging it. So that way when I go to press this open, I'm gonna see my big butterfly instead of the little one there that has a swing cut off. All right, we've got to do a little bit of trimming here. We got to get this corner off. What you're going to do is you're going to take your ruler and you're going to line your 1/4 inch mark right up on top of that stitch line that you did. That way you're going to be essentially creating your 1/4 inch seam when you trim off your corner. And you can save these. A lot of people save this and then they call it bonus projects. So if you could make a coordinating throw pillow with everything that you trimmed off, just have some fun with it. All right, so just like everything else, we're gonna go ahead and press this open. And I just slide the iron straight down like that. And then I like to give it a good press from the other side as well. So all the Stashin with Stephanie quilts are designed to be able to complete in about a month or so. I typically do mine in about a week as I am working to get things ready, because we have, you know, lots of other things that happen over Quilt Addicts Anonymous, and it's just a little nuts with the pandemic and having our 2 small children around all the time. So what I did here is I designed it specifically so that we have no seams to match when we're putting our 9 patch together. We're gonna have to match it when we put our rows together, but as far as joining our bits to the side, there's nothing that fancy that you have to do. We are gonna match some seams when we sew our rows together, and I'll show you how to do that. But as far as sewing this together, no different than a basic 9 patch. But I do have one tip for you, and that is when you are sewing, normally I like to take and I flip it over like this, and then I'll stitch down the side. But for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to stitch with this side up. And let me give it a close-up to show you the reason why. So you can see here that we get this little triangle where all the seams come together. And I want to be stitching just to the right of where that triangle is, and that will make sure that I don't lose that point that I worked so hard to get when we were trimming everything together. I am back to that 1/4 inch seam, and occasionally too, you will have pressed something weird or whatever, and you will find that these pieces are just a hair shorter than the one underneath. So again, you can just line your corners up and just keep it kind of taut. And I like to also put my finger in that center part to keep that nice and straight. You can pin too. I'm going to slow down as I come to that corner, so I'm sewing just to the right of it and stitch down. Now for this middle one, nothing to worry about. It's just 2 straight seams, so we're just gonna line up those corners. I usually just hold it up in front of me like this and then feed it through the sewing machine. Same deal with this bottom one here. I want to make sure that I am sewing with this part on top, so I'm just going to flip that over, get my bits lined up, my corners, and in this case it's actually a hair short, so I'm going to start with the top lined up just like before, and once I'm in about maybe half an inch or so, what I do is I just line up those bottom corners and I just hold a finger on top of that and hold the finger on that center, and everything's going to turn out fabulously flat. I like to wait to press my rows until I have them all together. I feel like it's more efficient that way, but I do lay everything back out to make sure I've done everything correctly. My points are all going in the correct area, because it's a lot easier to fix now than when you have your entire row together. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and repeat going down the other side. I press these seams open as well. It really helps make for nice flat joins. You just want to be careful as you're dealing with other seams that are going, that you don't accidentally press those going in a direction you don't want. So a lot of lifting and pressing as you work. And then what I like to do is flip it over like that and just go over that center seam. I mean, you can see these points are going right out to the edge, and it's because we took the time to trim press. We use that 4 at a time, which is a much more accurate way of doing flying geese. And then also we were paying attention when we were stitching, so that we were just to the side of where that came together. I'm going to show you on this one. Here you can see the stitch line, that it is going just to the right side of where those points come together, and then when you open it up you get fabulous results like this. Now you are supposed to have your point of your top tip be about 1/4 inch away from the edge. That's by design, because that's going to get stitched up when we're stitching our blocks together. So don't panic if you see that. That's the way it's supposed to look. All right, I'm going to press the rest of these, and we're going to pin our rows together, and then I'm going to show you how to join your block. So typically when I sew these together, I would flip my top row to my middle first, and then I would do the same here. But again, this time I want to make sure that that middle row is on top, because we want to make sure that we are sewing just to the side of where those points come together, so that way we get fabulous points and fabulous results. So what I'm going to do actually is flip my middle row to my bottom row and do things a little bit differently. We're going to pin these seams here, and then we're just going to stitch just like we did with the others along here. You can pin your ends. I typically don't, because you're not going a long way. I just want to make sure that my seams are nice and on top of each other. So when you press your seams open like this and you're pinning, you kind of just want to look at it from the top like that. And you want to get things right on top of each other. And it's easier to do when you have fabrics like this where they're different colors. You got pink on one side and white on the other, as it's pretty easy to tell where that split is. Now I always pin in the right side of the seam allowance, and I pin right where that seam is. And because this is where I'm going to be stitching, so that's where I want it to be. If I were to pin in the left side of the seam allowance, then I would have to pull that pin too early. The other thing I see people do is they'll get everything nice and lined up, and they'll pin going this way, and then the seam is nice and lined up down here, but it can get all shifty up here, and then you don't have good points anymore. So you really always want to make sure you're pinning right where you're going to be sewing. Even if I pin from there, but I didn't put my pin in until like a 1/2 inch down, then this still can move a ton. So you want to make sure you're being really careful with that. And then when I'm sewing, what I'll do is I'll stitch down, I'll stitch just to the seam side of that bit, of that triangle, and then I'll stop with my needle down in this half of the seam allowance, because that acts like a pin, and then I'm safe to pull this pin and still get a great join. I'm just lining up the top 2 corners because I chose not to pin them. I'm just gonna get them in line right before I put them under the presser foot. Get started and then kind of see where I'm at there. I like to put my finger right on that middle point of the seam. Slow down as I come to that, and so just to the right of that triangle, a tiny little one in the seam. I will speed up again. Now I'm stopping with my needle down in that first half of the seam allowance as close to this needle as I can get to the pin. Now I'm going to pull that pin as everything should be held together. Nothing fancy to look for in this middle section, so we can just go. Slow down again and stop as I come to that seam allowance and stop with my needle down, then pull the pin. And I see a lot of people will stitch using the start stop button instead of their presser foot, their foot pedal. And that is not your friend when it comes to accurate piecing, because you need to be able to slow down as you come to critical points, like I did a lot on this one. So I would not recommend doing that if you're trying to become more accurate with your sewing. You can press this now, you can press this at the end. What I'm just going to do is I'm going to go ahead and flip it again so that that middle row is up. I'll flip it over. We're going to pin and sew just like we did before. All right, I'm going to press the seam open. I'm going to start by opening that seam with my fingers, and then this is a lot of lifting and pressing of that iron. You don't just want to slide it down because you will press some seams going in the direction you don't want. And as long as you keep a few fingers ahead of the iron to open that seam up, this is really pretty easy. It does take a little bit of getting used to if you're switching from pressing it open, but again, I find that this makes for really super flat seams, so you can do some really fun stuff with quilting. You don't have to worry about you know, getting your needles stuck and broken. It just, and the points just look so pretty and flat and exactly the way you want them to be. Now I get asked all the time, do I use steam in my iron? I don't, for 2 reasons. One, I don't want it to like spit and sputter because I've had too many irons where that happens eventually. And 2, I also feel like it distorts the fabric a little bit. So what I use instead is this mist sprayer. You can get them on Amazon or beauty supply stores. It turns any liquid into an aerosol mist, just like that. And I just refilled it, so it is really going right now. And so what I do is I will just mist those seams, and then that helps it lay even flatter. As I go over it, you can already see the difference between the bottom. It looks super flat and square versus the top that I haven't done yet. And I usually do this as like the final step with the last press of the block, and then also as I'm sewing rows together for the quilt top. So I'm going to show you how to join this to the other part, so that way you have nice accurate points when you're joining that, and then you've got it. You got everything you need to do to make this quilt. All right, so I've got my rest of my row already all sewn together and ready to go, and we're going to add this block to it. I'm going to go ahead and flip that right sides together and then turn it so it's a little easier for you guys to see on the camera. Whenever I'm pinning 2 triangles together, I like to use 2 pins to do it. I'll show you how here. What you're going to do is you're going to take your pin and you're going to put it right at the top of that tip of your point, and then you're going to find the corresponding tip on the one below and put it right in there as well. Now you will see that this one ended up being a little short, and so these edges are not matching up. That's okay, because nobody is ever going to see the inside of your quilt, and I do have at least 1/8 of an inch there, so I'm going to be good to go. So what I'm going to do when I sew this is I'm still going to sew just to the side of these points, and no one will ever know that I was off just a smidge on the inside. All right, so I've got that pinch between my thumb and my forefinger, just like that, to keep this pin going straight up and down. Now with the second pin, I'm going to take and I'm going to pin across. And what that does is it keeps these points right on top of each other, so that way I can sew and have them be right as close as possible. But if I were to rock this and pull it out, the top one would go forward, the bottom would go back, and they would no longer be where they need to be. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that. I'm going to go ahead and match up these guys. It's probably going to be a little bit harder to tell for you guys on camera, but I'm just looking at it from above and getting those lined up. And the good thing is these are background fabrics, so if you have a little bit of trouble getting them perfect, no big deal, no one's going to see. Now these corners are going to be the same way. We're just going to look at them from above to get them lined up, but it's just a little bit trickier because you're going on the diagonal. So I just like to kind of peel it back just a smidge until I'm positive that I've got those bits right on top of each other. And then I'm going to pin into that seam allowance, this time on an angle, to keep that together. And you'll notice I'm always pinning on the left side of the seam allowance. That's because we sew from this direction. So I'll stop again with my needle down in the first half of the seam allowance and then pull the pin and keep going. I'm going to go ahead and slow down as I come to that first half of the seam allowance, and once I sew mostly right up to that seam, that's when I pull the pin. Do the same thing here. Now this one, I'm keeping it in line with the edge, but what I want to do is if I need to make a small adjustment, and you don't want it to be like a jerky adjustment, you want it to be a nice smooth adjustment so that my needle is going to come right to the side where that point is. That's what I'm going to do. So nice and slow. Sewing right up to that pin and then removing it. And finish her up. And when I get to the bottom there, I'll just line up those corners, hold them in place with my finger. And then when it gets to the edge and I can't hold on to that anymore, I move my finger to the side, and that helps keep everything in line. Now you saw my hand back here a little bit. That wasn't pulling on the fabric, that was just kind of guiding it to help it stay straight. I feel like that works well for me. But yeah, definitely don't tug your fabric through. You don't want to do that. That will stretch it all to heck. All right, let's take a peek and see how we did. Oh yeah, that's looking pretty good. As soon as I press that, it's gonna look pretty fabulous. And so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, these are looking good down here, coming together well as up here too. So I'm gonna give this a press, and then you are ready to go. I just wanna say too, so if I were to press this over like that, see how it looks like I've cut off the tip of that? It is going to look totally different when it's pressed open. It will look much more flatter, just like this one there. And give it a spritz again, just to help get that super flat. And that looks really, really good. I'm very happy with these points, how they came together. They are right on top of each other, matching, which is what we want. That is, you know, that's the goal always, is to have your points end up where you want them to be. These are coming together well as well. If you were not happy with how this turned out, you don't have to rip the whole thing apart. You can just rip about a ½ inch or to an inch on either side, repin, and then just stitch that section. Make sure you start about an inch before and end an inch after to secure those threads really well. But no need to pick everything if you're unhappy with a little join. But I will take this. I am very pleased with how this turned out. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this pattern and video tutorial. Again, it's called Cross and Dot, and it is available at shop.quiltaddicts.com. You can buy it on its own, or if you join our Stashin with Stephanie subscription club, you get access to all of these for free, the patterns that have been released to it. You also get a discount on my next book, Fat Quarter Workshop, which is coming out in October or November. Pre-orders are open for that right now, and you can get that. And it features our 10 most popular Stashin with Stephanie patterns, so all fat quarter friendly, and then also 2 exclusive patterns that have never been released before are there as well. So check that out. You also get exclusive discounts if you're a member of the club, and we send you 12 fat quarters for the price of 10, $29.99 a month plus shipping every month. So check that out, and until next time, happy quilting.